From the Chicago Sun-Times newsroom, I'm Natasha Korecki, and this is Off Message, our weekly political talk show. Joining me this week is columnist Mary Mitchell, our new E&O columnist, and the head of Reboot Illinois, Madeleine Doubek, and finally Mark Brown, another columnist. This week we are going to talk a little bit about the Metra House of Cards. And Mark Brown, you went through some of these different index cards that became available to the media this week. What struck you were there any surprises when you looked through them?
The most striking thing really was that what Mike Madigan is getting in trouble for here most recently used to be just the normal way of doing business at Metra. And during that period, I think a lot of us in the news media thought that Metra was a more professional operation than it really was. I don't think we knew what a bunch of hacks were hanging out there. And among the people that were trying to influence hiring were some people that had some pretty good reputations in the good government circles, like Paul Simons, and there was even a Dawn Clark-Netsch attempt to clout somebody in.
And it was bipartisan also. We had Henry Hyde, Denny Hastert, Jeff Ladd was the chairman for many years. So there was really some bipartisan clouding going on.
Bipartisan clouding. See, who says the two sides can't get along in Illinois?
George Ryan.
George Ryan, of course.
Another surprise, the Shaw brothers were in there. Who would have thought the Shaw brothers had that kind of clout at Metra? I did.
And the bottom line is, that was the way business was done. I mean, what good did it do for you to have a political power if you couldn't use it to get your cousin or your friend or your neighbor a job, So I think it really gives you a glimpse of a past era. Now the same kind of behavior is considered criminal or unethical, but back then, that was the way you did business.
Why are we just seeing all of this now? This dated from '83 to 1991.
Well, I mean, it's coming to light now because of the whole Alex Clifford controversy from earlier this year, which really revolved around Madigan, and the severance agreement, which was secret. And so the new chairman, Marty Oberman, is trying to be more open and transparent, and the Metra board has actually adopted a set of rules that they're going to have a log now, so we'll get to see more of this stuff in the future. And, it sounds like a pretty good idea, actually. It'd be fun for all of us if they had a log at every agency.
So it's going to be something where it's set up where it's publicly accessible, where you can see if anyone making comments regarding the hiring process at Metra?
Or if somebody just says, hey, Marty Oberman, or hey, whomever they know at Metra, Don Orsinio, my kid needs a job, that's supposed to get logged now.
And so the public would know, at least you would be aware that your representative or someone that you elected or you put your trust in has this behavior. I mean, I don't think that it's illegal, asking, looking around and saying, oh, is there a job here for my cousin or my brother? Right. But I think the public needs to know that is how this person got his or her job.
So bringing us back to the present, how much of this do you think is still going on, Madeleine Doubek? And I do blame you.
Thank you. I hope that it's not going on to the extent that these cards would indicate, although, 800 cards over 10 or 12 years, I suppose, isn't all that bad. But we certainly have seen several stories just this week that indicate that there's still some of this going on. The recorder of deeds in Cook County, Karen Yarborough, joining Joe Barrios and saying, hey, the rules don't apply to me. I can hire relatives if I want. We've got Forrest Claypool at the CTA hiring somebody from the D'Amico family, and questions being raised about that. So I don't think this is over, and to a certain extent, the world has always operated, private and public, around who you know, not what you know, but you hope that what you know actually gets looked at as well, at
particularly when taxpayer money is going to fund there.
Well, one improvement I would point out is that in the 80s, when this stuff was going on at Metra, Mr. D'Amico, his parents and I believe his grandmother were all convicted of ghost payrolling. And that's one of the things I wonder about with some of these Metra people who turned down the jobs. They probably turned up and figured out, oh, I got to work. I thought this was we used to have ghost jobs where you didn't even have to come to work. So I think mostly we've gotten rid of that. So we're moving ahead.
We're moving in the right direction.
Well, with that, let's turn to campaign finance reports come in, and it looks like Rahm continues on his trajectory to have a whole lot of money, $7 million in the bank. Is there anyone emerging who can compete with that? Is there an anti-Rahm candidate?
Let's just say there's an anti-Rahm campaign, especially on the South Side. They're calling it anybody but Rahm. There are people who are trying to put together a candidate that may be able to face him. I don't think we've seen that person, at least in the African American community, emerge yet. But believe me, every day people are looking.
But don't we have to
together.
see that person by now? I mean, how can they compete with?
Alderman Bob Fioretti spoke to the City Club, and Karen Lewis from the Chicago Teachers Union was there cheering him on. So he may be the alternative at this point, but he certainly doesn't have much money, and Toni Preckwinkle hasn't been doing much fundraising. You know, I suppose she could get some help from an independent super PAC that could catch her up. We'll have to see.
If she did run, she would not need as much money coming out of the gate as a Bob Fioretti, or, you know, I mean, she has a lot of other things going for her, you know, just stature in the community that would make her very formidable. If you've got the right niche here, you can.
So you need somebody who can kind of excite the base, and somebody who can get the unions behind you, of course, in this race. So
You need somebody that can reach out across the whole city.
Right, and run a good campaign, a credible campaign, an energetic campaign, and an inclusive campaign. Because I do think there is a high anti-Rahm sentiment going on. I mean, there are a lot of people that are still upset and angry about closing schools, and it doesn't matter that he went and fixed the red line. They're mad that he closed down their little school in their neighborhood. So I think the environment is ripe for an anti-Rahm campaign, but I don't think they've found the right candidate yet with the kind of force and personality to go up against Rahm.
Okay, well, let's turn to quote of the week. Why don't we start with you, Mary?
Derek Smith, who has been booted out of the legislature again, but this time by vote. We ran a story that talked about his interview with FBI agents, and many times during the interview he had one thing to say, and that is, I effed up. And when someone says that, you know it can't be good.
My favorite was from the Illinois Education Association forum. That was the first time we've seen Pat Quinn and Bruce Rauner together, and at one point Quinn looked at the crowd and said, please don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative over here, pointing to Rauner.
He got some good zingers in
He
that
did.
day, didn't
He
he?
had his lines memorized. Well, afterwards then, Rauner met with reporters, and the first thing he says is, I've never been called Bruce Almighty before. I kind of like that. I mean, I felt like we need a disparaging nickname for Mr. Rauner. He's been calling Quinn Quinocchio. I'm all for it. We're going to call him Bruce Almighty,
Bruce
from
Almighty.
here on out.
Mine comes from a Mike Sneed piece this week where she talks about the publisher of Indigo, who said, quote, I am not a paid mouthpiece for Bruce Rauner. She's saying, no, I'm just supporting him. However, Sneed points out, citizens of Rauner paid her $51,000 already for several events. When Sneed asked her, is there more on the way, she said, yes, well, there's nothing formal yet. Let's just put it that way. And with that, thank you for joining us this week on Off Message, and we will see you next week.